Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Megan Weber, an extension educator focusing on aquatic invasive species here at the University of Minnesota. And we're excited to have Dr. Alex Bajcz here as our guest for the webinar. I'm going to get to Alex and letting him do some introductions here quick, but I'm going to do some housekeeping first. We also have Michelle Isaacson here. She is the one behind the AIS Detectors program window. And if you have any issues or are having some tech problems, please feel free to send a message into chat, and Michelle is here to help you. For the webinar, we're going to be using a tool called Slido to do our Q&A. About half the time is used by talking and about half of it is for Q&A. So we'll give some specific instructions, but if you have questions while Alex is talking, you can go to slido.com and enter the event code POINTS, and it'll give you the opportunity to type your questions into the Q&A there. It also allows you to upvote questions. So if there's something that you see someone asking, you're like, oh, I'd really like to know the answer to that too, you can upvote it and it'll rise to the top of my screen and I'll be more likely to ask that question to Alex. We are recording today as well. It usually takes about a week to get things transcribed and up onto our YouTube channel, and you'll get a notice when that's done. But you can always go subscribe to us on YouTube and get notification directly from them whenever we post a new video. So if you miss anything or want to revisit, that recording will be available. And then we do have everyone muted for the duration of the webinar. So if you do have technical issues or need to connect with the hosts, go ahead and type your question or type your issue into chat. If you have questions for Alex, go ahead and put those into the Q&A in Slido. If you're having troubles with Slido, it's okay to put your question in chat. Michelle is here to help, and she will take your question and she'll move it over to Slido so that we can all see it there for you. I think that's all that I have for the introductory side. So I'm just going to turn it over to Alex. And Alex, feel free to introduce yourself. You can take over screen sharing and let us know about what you're here to share with us about today.
Okay, so I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. As Megan said, my name is Dr. Alex Bajcz, and I am the staff quantitative ecologist for MASERC, which is the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center here at the University of Minnesota. So my job is sort of to facilitate with all things data related to the projects that our center funds. And today I'm going to be talking about PI Charter. So the title of my talk is Charting the Course for a Comprehensive Statewide Point-Intercept Database, and PI Charter is central to that. So I hope Megan let you all know and that you all got the sort of memo that you were supposed to be packing your sunscreen and your trashy novels and your oversized shades, because today I'm planning with this talk to take us all on a voyage, hopefully somewhere sunny, specifically a voyage of how PI Charter came to be, what it even is, what it does, what's next for it, and crucially, where you all can fit into that journey. So that's really our itinerary for today's talk. I'm going to be starting with a history of PI Charter and why it was dreamt up in the first place. Then I'll give you the full-on guided tour for all of its water slides and spas and buffet tables and all that good stuff. And then I'll wrap with where you all as potential collaborators and users can help make PI Charter into the luxury class vessel that we all here at MASERC want it to be. So without further ado, I've got a lot to cover, so let's just shove off. The home port for this story, as with so many here at MASERC, is with now Dr. Mike Verhoeven, whom many of you probably know, or at least know of if you've been following MASERC's work, since he's been involved with us for 8-ish years now. He started as a MASERC grad in Dan Larkin's lab back in 2016, focusing on aquatic invasive plant management and some very basic but very crucial questions. Does managing invasive plants actually, work? And what are the impacts that that has on native species? Mike recognized that to answer these questions, you of course would need plant community data from a lake after a treatment. But you'd also need reference data to compare those data to, either from the same lakes prior to treatment or from untreated but similar lakes, or ideally both. Otherwise, you couldn't say that what's happening in treated lakes wouldn't also be happening the same way or differently in untreated lakes, right? And of course, because nature is so messy, more data is always going to be better for answering questions like these. So that was his goals, that was his focus. But how could he get all these data that he wanted? Well, Mike knew that fellow MASERC researcher Dr. Ray Newman and colleagues had been collecting plant surveys of lakes, and that they had also started to request survey data from other folks that they knew had them for the same or similar lakes gathered for other purposes. They then compiled those data and used them to see how ecology and management affected the dominance of the invasive curly leaf pondweed in treated lakes. The data set from that project ultimately got up to about 80 lakes and 400 total surveys. However, Mike suspected, based on his conversations and feelings, that there were probably far more plant surveys out there than that. He just needed to figure out who had them and whether or not they'd be willing and able to share them. So he began this gargantuan task of reaching out to DNR project teams, to consultants, to counties, watershed districts, lake associations, basically anyone he could think of, and asking them for any PI survey data they might have. And it took Mike probably 4-ish years to do this, but he expanded that initial pool of data up to including about 1,500 lakes and 3,500 surveys. So a really massive data set by comparison to that first study, which was itself pretty big. Throughout this sojourn, Mike's team recognized the immense value of the data set they were building beyond just the plant management questions that had spurred building it. There'd now be these piles of data for answering many other kinds of AIS questions, like what community characteristics make lakes more invadable, and what's different about lakes being overtaken by invasives compared to lakes where that's not happening. Spoiler alert, MASERC projects that are coming up are going to be investigating exactly those kinds of questions. There would also be the benefit, though, of unifying data from many different sources. You'd have data from different folks gathered for different reasons on the same or similar lakes at a range of times, enabling us to track changes through both space and time, which are very key variables in any analysis. Plus, there's the value for general ecology questions. How diverse are Minnesota's aquatic plant communities? These are understudied communities. What are the niches of its members? How do these taxa interact with each other? How does that then affect fish and wild rice and recreation and so on? So this is truly an amazing resource for exploring not just invasive questions, but many other types too, really broadening our understanding of how Minnesota lakes operate at a fundamental level. Still, in candid moments, maybe below deck if you found him, Mike would surely tell you that they navigated some choppy waters to amass this data set. The biggest, of course, being that it's literally well over 100 different entities that collect and house these data statewide. It's not just a couple. So it's a lot of emails and phone calls and partnerships and relationships to build and maintain and respect. The data themselves are just as diverse. Those survey methods are standardized. No two survey data sheets look the same, as I will prove to you later. So gluing them together in one database is just not straightforward. It took Mike literally hundreds of hours to do it. And it wasn't always easy for those who were sharing the data either. They had to locate files, render them shareable, get permissions, send them along with their metadata, and help resolve discrepancies, perhaps devoting limited staff time in the process all the way along. These are truly donated data. Sharers are providing them without a direct reward, but often at least at some cost. And of course, Mike had to be there, the human captain in the middle of it all, to coordinate, steer, and power everything, which isn't always practical. So it's one thing to realize those kinds of headwinds in hindsight, but Mike and Dan actually anticipated them pretty darn well, because in their original MASERC proposal for this project, they proposed that they were going to construct a web app that partners could go straight to for information and submissions, reducing the need for so many emails to fly back and forth. There, the partners could submit data directly to us, and the app, not a human, could do all the cleaning and processing involved. The data would then be accessible on the app to everyone who visited, and we could reward partners with recognition as well as with new ways to explore all these data that we were gathering. It could even serve as sort of an education hub on the value of these kinds of data and we could spur maybe more of them to be collected. So that was their 2016 vision all the way back then. But unfortunately, for various reasons, they weren't quite able to realize it, at least not until I came along. I joined MACERC staff in June of 2021. I had the R background. I had the interest in learning R Shiny. And crucially, I had one thing Mike didn't have, and that's way more time on my hands to pursue something like this than the average poor graduate student has. So I began building PI Charter in fall of 2022 with the intent of making it realize all those aspects of Mike and Dan's vision, starting with that immense data submission challenge that I talked about earlier. Today, as I stand here, I'm happy to report that I've just completed a 2-month overhaul to bring PI Charter up to its version 2.0, where it will hopefully be even closer to that vision now. And I have to admit that I'm a little nervous because today will be PI Charter 2.0's maiden voyage. So I'm very happy to have you all on board for it, and I hope it doesn't make a fool of me in the process. Before I get to it, though, we have to divert for some shore leave because I need to explain the PI and PI Charter, which I have not done yet. I've been talking up to this point about aquatic plant surveys generally, but there are actually many different kinds, each with different methodologies and goals and requirements. One common type, for example, is called a meander survey. This is where you snake around a lake in a zigzag pattern, stopping more or less wherever you want and then sampling the plants there. The surveyor gets to decide where to sample and when based on their whims, and usually they're targeting one or a few taxa and may not even record others that they see. Delineation studies are similar. They're designed to map where a specific species, such as an invasive, is located, making it easier to design control strategies. But other species are typically ignored unless we're worried about like non-target effects. Then you have things like hydroacoustic surveys that use sound to determine where plant biomass of any kind is located and how dense it is. But these don't, by default, gather any taxonomic data at all. So those are some other kinds of common plant surveys out there. But the PI and PI Charter comes from a very specific type of plant survey called a Point-Intercept or PI survey. And these are really quite different from the other kinds I just noted. Here's how one very basically works. You take your lake and you lay a grid with a certain spacing level over top of that lake, like is shown up here. The intersection points along that grid then become your sample locations, and you have to go out and then sample all of them pretty much, unless they end up being too shallow or too deep to actually sample or to have plants living in them. At each of these points, you then take a rake head and you somehow get it over the side of your boat and somehow get it to scrape along the bottom of the lake. And then you reel it in, and all the plant material that gets hooked in it is scored for relative abundance for every taxon. While all plant surveys have their value, PI surveys for us researchers at least are really the gold standard because they produce dozens or even hundreds of data points worth of community composition data per survey that are not driven by spatial or surveyor or species related biases. We go in knowing where we're going to sample and we're going to gather data on everything that's there. So when I say plant surveys, what I mean is that MACERC is here collecting PI surveys specifically for these reasons. That may change in the future, but we did call it PI Charter for a reason. With that clarification, I'm now mostly going to switch over to spending the rest of our time showing off PI Charter. And I'm actually going to pull it up live to do this, which is always risky. So keep in mind, maiden voyage, we could encounter some hiccups. Just bear with me if that happens. We'll always be able to restart the app. I'll be working on a local version on my computer, but you can follow along with me on the live version if you want to. You can find PI Charter on the MACERC website under the resources menu. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Before I keep talking anymore. Here on the MACERC site, there's a resources menu. There's PI Charter. Or as Megan just noted, it is also available via Z-Link, z.umn.edu/PI Charter, which was just put in the chat. So that's the app. Here it is. If you navigate to it, I'm going to give a quick overview here in case some of you are trying to jump on the app. Currently, there are 4 tabs that you can explore on PI Charter, and they're listed here along the top: Overview, Leaderboard, Submissions, and Records. And each of these addresses Mike and Dan's original vision in some way. So I'm actually going to briefly go over each one. That said, 15-ish minutes isn't like nearly long enough to really do them justice. So it's going to be quick, but if you want to know more, you have options. You, of course, have the Q&A. You have email, which you can always send me an email. You can request a help session with me, and I can work through it one-on-one. And there are also video tutorials that I've recorded for every one of the tabs, at least most of the tabs at this point, and I can put the links to those in the chat so that everybody has access to them. So those might also be useful if you want to do a really deep dive. All right. Without further ado, then, let's just go into talking about PI Charter, and I can start showing you around. When you launch it, you're going to land here on the Overview tab, but this is not where I'm actually going to start. I'm going to start our tour on the Leaderboard tab because it's the simplest to explain, but it's also really important. Earlier, I said we dreamt of PI Charter formally recognizing those who gathered and sent us the data, without whom this resource simply would not exist. And to that end, on this tab, you'll see two tables. On the left table is all the surveyors who appear in our database, and on the right is a table of all the submitters for those surveys, each sorted by the number of surveys involved. Maybe as you tab through here, you'll see yourself or colleagues or friends. And if so, on behalf of all of us here at MASERC, you have my deepest gratitude. We are so grateful for your hard work and partnership, and we really hope you'll continue to help us build this resource together. I'm getting goosebumps talking about this right now. If you are not yet on here, though, we really hope you soon will be, and I'll come back to that point later for sure. Now, suppose you are thinking at this point, well, okay, I want to help, or I might be willing to help, and we might have some data, but how do I know if what we have is PI survey data specifically? I know Alex said that was really important. Well, we can use the Overview tab to answer that question, in case my explanation earlier didn't quite do it. At the top of this tab is this all-important Start Here button. If you click this button, up pops a menu packed with useful information that you might want to know about the app. Everything you might want to know about this and the database, including stuff I've already mentioned, like what's a PI survey? How does it differ from other kinds of surveys? Why are these surveys valuable? Why is MASERC gathering them, right? So if you aren't sure if what you have is PI data, here is another set of resources that you can consider. And in fact, in here, I actually have like a detailed explanation of how you would tell the difference between a PI survey data sheet and a Meander survey data sheet, for example. So start here. There's a lot of really useful information. Now, suppose you're thinking, well, okay, I think what we have is PI survey data, but how do I know if MASERC already has it or not? And to answer that question, we can examine this map here on the Overview tab. Every marker on here represents one lake that we have at least one survey in our database for. If I come in here and hover over a lake, you'll see I get a lot more information. Which lake is this? What's it called? What's its unique DOW number? What county is it in? So if you find a marker for a lake on here, that means we must have at least one record for that lake. Then you might be wondering, okay, well, but does MASERC have all the surveys for this lake that we might have? Or when was the last time that this lake was surveyed according to MASERC's database? To find that out, you can actually click the marker that you're hovering over. If you do that, you'll activate it, you'll turn it purple, and the lake summary information will get thrown over into this table on the right-hand side. Here you can see just how many surveys we have, when they occurred, how many taxa were found across all of them, which taxa those were, and if any invasives were noted. So you'll notice here that curly leaf pondweed was detected in this lake in this survey. So if you see a marker, we know we have some records for it. If you click that marker, you'll see exactly which records those are. So that's how you would identify any gaps we might have in our database that you might be able to fill. Now, there's so much more that this tab can do, but I really don't have time to show it all off. I will, however, just run through a couple of really quick highlights. If you want to find a specific lake, but you can't find it on the map, you have another option. If you click this button to open up this options menu, one of the options in here is a lake selector. So if you enter or select a lake in this selector, What that will do is force the map to zoom in on only that lake or only include that lake's marker, making it much easier to find. If you want to clear any of the selections that you've made up to this point, you can hit the clear selections button, and that will sort of wipe us back to the starting point for the app. Maybe you're interested more in a larger area like a county. Well, there's a county filter too. So if I pick a county in this county filter, we'll zoom in on just all the records from that county. I can then select all the markers from that county in one click using this button. And then I can look at all of those records at once, maybe if I want to make a comparison. If you're more interested in plant ecology, though, you can actually use this taxon filter, which is my favorite feature of the whole app. If you search for and select a taxon on here, what you will do is filter to only the lakes that taxon has ever been observed in at least one survey, which I think is a really cool way to see the distributions of different species in the state and to see how rare different species are. So that's another cool feature. The last thing I want to show you on this tab is actually back in the start menu, and it's all the way at the very bottom. At the bottom, new this year, you will find a section with draft contract language. Many PI surveys are contracted in some capacity. If you or your organization contracts for PI surveys, we'd love it if you'd consider incorporating data submission into those contracts explicitly. If you're interested, we have template language here that you should feel free to adapt. This might be a really good way of ensuring that there's staff time available for the submission process, even though hopefully that doesn't really take that long. So I know that there's been a groundswell of interest in this. We're finally delivering on that with this language, and this language can also be found on our website. Okay, now hopefully you're thinking, okay, we have PI data that MASERC doesn't have. How do we get it to them? And to answer that, I'll be moving to the third tab here, the submissions tab. Earlier, I said the biggest challenge we face with this database is the data science one. How do we unify all these data together without a human having to do all of that excruciating work? And the submissions tab is really our answer to that. My plan is to actually walk you through the entire submissions process really quickly to show you how it kind of ticks and to prove how easy it actually is. But first, to give you a better sense of sort of the hidden challenges that the app faces along the way here, I actually want to show you some random PI survey files to sort of demonstrate how different they are and to highlight some of the ways they created unique problems when designing the submissions tab. So I'm going to open up those files, but first, just so we can get our bearings, I'm going to bring up a fake mini survey file that I've mocked up. So this is a miniature version, but it's got a lot of the same kinds of data you'd see in a real file. Along the rows, we usually have, but not always, our location data, which is those points along the grids. So where were we sampling? Those are our rows. And then the columns are usually holding information on things that we found out about each of those places that we sampled. So maybe we have the lat long data for a given point. Maybe we have the depth of that location. And then we have the various taxa that we found at these locations, if they were detected at all. And you can see here scores for their relative abundance. So we aren't always going to have all these data. Sometimes we'll have a lot more. Sometimes we'll have a lot less. But this is more or less what one of these files is going to look like. So let me go ahead and pull up a real file so that we can look at it. I'm sure this is going to look at least a little intimidating to some of you, and that's okay. We don't really need to pay attention too much to what's in here. What I do want you to notice is this. There are a lot of columns in here, a lot of which are empty. We don't need empty columns. Many other columns in here look like they're very specific to a user's needs. There may be summary columns. We don't tend to need those either. We just want the raw data. There's taxonomic data in here. They're all over here. But you'll notice that the column names are sort of coded, right? They're here, but they're coded. So we're going to need to decode those in some capacity. And then if we scroll down, you'll see that there's a bunch of stuff down here too, right? That we don't need. It's summary stuff. It's not raw data. So that's one file. Let's go ahead and look at another file. This one's going to look a little similar. Again, we've got a lot of summary columns here. We've got an awful lot of columns, but many of them are actually empty again. We've got taxonomic columns again, but again, codes, and they're different codes than the one we just saw. And if I zoom down, you'll see that there are a ton of empty rows in here, which we obviously don't need either. So that's another challenge we're going to have to overcome. And then here's one more file just at random. This one's a little bit more minimal. It actually doesn't even have spatial data at all. It has taxa columns again, but again, codes, and they're different than the codes we've seen before. And this person is using some text in here, which isn't always common. Most PI data are numerical in some way, shape, or form. So hopefully you are starting to see at least what I mean when I say that each of these files that we might get is really its own snowflake. But to link them all up together, we're going to need to break down those differences. And the amazing thing is that the app can do just that. And it only needs 19 questions at max to do that. And they're really not that complicated. So let's just go ahead and dive in here and try it out. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to skip this first question because it's not that important to us. The first question is my name as the submitter. In part, this is to populate the leaderboard tab. So I can put my name in there and hit next. Next question's asking for my email address in case there's an issue with the submission. That's pretty easy. Hit next. Next question is asking who the surveyors are. So in part because we want to put them on the leaderboard tab. So I'll put in Mike in case he was the surveyor on this. I'll put in one anonymous person as well. So I've gone ahead and put that in here too. And I've hit next. And then the next question asks what lake was being surveyed here. So will go ahead and type in the name of my lake here, mud. And I'll have a drop-down menu so I can pick the exactly right mud that was being surveyed here so that we're not mixing up different lakes with the same name. Next question, when did the survey happen? What date? So that's pretty easy. I use the date picker to pick and hit next. Next questions, what's the units on the depth column if you've got one? We can go ahead and put feet here and hit next. Next question asks, okay, what's the maximum relative abundance value you could get for a taxon? Some people use 1, others use 3, others use 5, others use something completely different. So this is a major difference between different surveyors. So it's a really useful piece of data to get as the submission is happening. So we can go ahead and pick a value and hit next. And then we're ready to do the actual submission process. And for right now, the app can take TSV files, CSV files, Excel files, shape files, and soon it will also be able to take Google Sheets. So whatever form the data are in, we can handle that. As just an example, I'm going to go ahead and throw in one of the sample files from earlier, the second one we saw, so that we can see how submitting this file would work. And you'll notice that as soon as I upload the file in here, the app's actually going to load that file and display it on the right-hand side from here on out so that I have it as a reference. The app's also going to do our first data check at this point. In this particular case, what it's checking for is text in the data columns. I mentioned earlier that text isn't always something that we'd be expecting. Here it's noting that lake and surveyor columns have text in them. Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know how else they wouldn't have text in them. So no need to worry about this here, but it's a handy check in case there was something interesting going on. All right, we'll hit next. This next question just asks, what row do the data in your data set start on? Usually it's 1, so I'll just leave that and hit next. But you'll remember when I opened this file earlier, there's a lot of empty rows in this data file. So this next question asks, where do the data actually end? And they don't end on 1001. They actually end here on row 99. So that's what I'm going to put, and I'm going to hit next. And you'll see when I do that, it cuts all those extra rows for me, which means a human didn't have to do that on either end, which is pretty awesome. So the next question, I mentioned earlier that usually locations are rows, taxa and stuff are columns. Sometimes folks do store their data the other way around. And ask Mike, it's really annoying to flip those data by hand, but in R, it's actually just one line of code. So if we needed to flip the table here at this point, that's actually easy to do. We could have R do it. We're going to skip that for now. The next question does maybe the most important thing of all, which is address column names. We saw earlier that even if surveyors are surveying and seeing the same taxa, they often use different codes in their data set to represent them. But to link like data with like, we're going to need everything to have the exact same names. So the app does this massive matching process to link what users tend to submit as column names to what we're going to need column names to be. And that matching has actually already been done over here on the table. You have the old submitters column names up here, and in the first row are now the new column names that we're going to substitute those with. And the app's basically just asking at this point, how did that renaming go? Did we end up with any problems? You'll notice here too that the app actually marks columns that it didn't recognize with delete, just in case we need to do something at this point to make sure those columns aren't lost just because the column name isn't recognized. As it turns out, all 5 of these columns are expendable. So there's no problems here. They can be deleted. It's not an issue, but it's another good safety check to make sure we're not losing data. So I'll go ahead and hit next. The last question that we're going to see asks, hey, where are the location data if there are any? And you can see that this file has lat long data in it. So all I have to do is select that and hit next. And I'm done. That was the last question. So now I can submit and the app will do the rest. It took a little under 5 minutes, which is hopefully the goal. And it saved someone on our end hours of work, like Mike used to have to do with these kinds of data. So that's the submissions tab in a nutshell. Hopefully you can see how it would be a game changer, reducing the burden on both submitter and receiver greatly, which is the goal here. We want this to be really easy. Now, maybe you're thinking, but I don't even have survey data to send, Alex. What's in all this for me? And maybe the records tab will inspire you, even though it is admittedly only just a bare prototype at this moment, because the tab is intended to be sort of the inverse submissions tab. Here you can retrieve the records from any survey that we've received up to this point. To do that, you just need to first select a lake. So I'll go ahead and select Susan Lake because I know there's a lot of surveys for that lake. And up will pop a selector of all the surveys we have for that lake. You can select one or you can select several, and the app will download them, load them into R, and then display them in a table here on the right-hand side for you to peruse and check out. You can even download those data at this point if you'd like to. However, eventually, this tab's goal is also to present a bevy of metadata and graphs and summaries. As just a sample for now, the tab is currently calculating for every survey and taxon the percentage of sampled locations that were occupied, something that's often called percent cover. So that's where we're starting out, but there's a lot more that this app could be showing on this tab. And that's really sort of the point. And that's a really good segue to the last slide I'm going to cover here for the most part, which is next steps and how you can help. First and foremost, one of my biggest goals over the next year is to build out that record tab and make it do everything that you all think it should do. I'm not a subject matter in PI surveys. I'm just not. I'm a data person. So I don't know everything cool that tab could do, but I bet you all do. What do you all want to see the records tab show and calculate? If we can make this tool work for you, we want the tab to work for you and the tool to work for you. Second, you can, of course, submit us new data. We'd love that. PI Charter is open for submissions 24/7, 365. But we know winter is a convenient time. So if you're a partner already, expect a call for new submissions via email next week. If you haven't submitted before but are interested, please let me know, or you can just try submitting. And if you do, let me know how that goes. We'd love feedback on the process. I'm always trying to improve it. Fourth, as I mentioned earlier, if you are involved in PI survey contracts, help us spread the word that PI Charter could become part of your contract language, as I mentioned earlier. In part, this could help you justify staff time to perform submissions. I know that is of keen interest to some out there that I've communicated with. Lastly, please consider becoming a PI survey advocate. Only about 10% or less of all Minnesota lakes have ever been surveyed, and most have only been surveyed once and not necessarily recently. So find out if lakes you care about have been surveyed, and if not, consider getting a survey commissioned. You can reach out to us here at MASERC if you want more information about that. And one last way you can help, a MASERC research team that's actually in the audience today, so they can speak for themselves here in the Q&A if they want to, has asked me to share that they are going to be putting PI Charter to use in a new project called Cultivating Resilience, Native Revegetation for AIS Resistance. They're going to dive into the plant community data in PI Charter to look for native species or communities that can stand strong even around invaders. Maybe they can keep the invaders at bay in some way. In addition to leveraging PI data, this project also intends to tap into the wisdom of restoration practitioners, as well as refine cultivation techniques such as seed collection, germination, and rearing and transplanting. If you've got expertise in any of these areas, they're going to be dropping a link in the chat, which it looks like they've already done, to where you can sign up. And like I said, that team is in attendance and can answer further questions on that if you have them. With that, I'll go ahead and conclude. I hope you all found this cruise we just took together both pleasurable and informative, and I am happy to go into more depth on anything I covered or address any questions or feedback that you may have. Cheers, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alex. I very much enjoyed the cruise. I'm going to take over screen sharing real quick so everyone can get the code to join us. There we go. Okay, so here is how you can access our Q&A. You can go to slido.com. We've put the link into chat as well so that you can find it. And once you get there, you'll enter the event code points, and that will allow you to interact with our Q&A. You could also, if you have a tablet or smartphone, you can scan that QR code and it'll just take you directly there. Please feel free to upvote any questions that you are interested in hearing the answer to. As they get upvoted, those will be the questions that I'll start from the top with as I ask Alex. And we've got nearly a half hour to work through the Q&A. So I'm going to, I'll leave the screen up for a little bit so that everyone can get into Q&A and ask Alex a couple of questions. And partway through, I'll shut off my screen share so you don't have to look at the same QR code the whole time that we're talking. So the first question, Alex, is wondering if there are going to be any efforts to share this with any neighboring states.
Oh, thank you for that question. I'm almost suspicious that it was seeded, in fact. I am aware of the fact that Wisconsin has already built something that's pretty statewide, although I think someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's pretty restricted to what DNR has access to. Oh, look at that. Someone already threw it out there. I had tried to establish some contact with that team a while back, just sort of share notes, and we just couldn't make it happen. But I know DNR at Wisconsin building a very similar tool and has very similar goals. And Michigan's trying to do the same. And I suspect pretty much anywhere where PI survey data are being gathered, an effort like this is underway. And I was thinking about this, as Ricky Bobby would say, if you're not first, you're last, right? We don't want to be last. We want to keep up with these other states trying to do this exact same thing. And I know, for example, that Michigan is intrigued by the fact that we have a submission portal so that people who are gathering this that are not state entities like the DNR could still compile their data into this database. So my goal all along has been to build something that was at worst compatible with what is happening in neighboring states. So I don't know that PI Charter is what that larger thing will inevitably end up being, but am I trying to ensure at a data science level that what we are building can easily integrate with those other efforts? Absolutely. And those conversations need to get booted back up again, and I'm motivated to do that. I'm hoping we can get the Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin people all in the same room and compare notes, because I bet I know I'd have a lot to learn from them, and perhaps there's something that can go the other way too. Thank you for that question.
Great. Thanks, Alex. All right. Next question is, how do you handle taxonomic harmonization, particularly for tricky species like hybrid water milfoil?
I think that I could answer this question a couple of different ways. Usually we try to bring it down to the species level. That doesn't always work. Sometimes we're restricted to family. Sometimes we're restricted to something like cyanobacteria or something like that. That's very generic. Sometimes just genus. Sometimes we go to the subspecies. For me, as not a subject matter expert, but more as a data integrity, data science engineering expert, for me, I trust the surveyors that they have done what they need to do to bring the data down to whatever the most relevant taxonomic level is for them. And we absolutely do get Myriophyllum spicatum X Sibericum or whatever for hybrid milfoil, or milfoil, or Myriophyllum hybrid, or Myriophyllum spa or whatever hybrid spa, there's a lot of column names that will usually indicate this we think is a hybrid. And that becomes a separate column to Myriophyllum spiccatum itself. So as long as the surveyor has put those data in different columns and we can recognize what they mean by those column headers, we keep those data separate. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question. On a logistical end, I have a 15,000 row lookup table. That's this column's what they've put as column names, and this is what it's going to be when we're done. And so as long as I've seen that code before, the app can recognize it. So I know I've seen a number of different ways of representing things like hybrid milfoil or hybrid cattail. And as long as that distinction exists in the data, I can translate it over once we homogenize.
Great. Thank you. Okay, on to the next question. So how is it that you're verifying that these plants were identified correctly, or maybe how is it verified that they were identified correctly? Are any of these data backed up by voucher specimens? And I see this note, I think in a couple of spots, some saying common names is a difficult way to display, but I think I also saw a note that it was tricky to read scientific names. So there's maybe a couple questions built in here on how the data is displayed and then
Yeah.
how we're verifying.
Two things there. Three things. I have this giant Q&A QA/QC process. If there are any illogicalnesses to the data, they don't enter our database. So that's why there's actually a delay between when submissions happen and when you can see the thing live on the app. I've got to go through there. For example, do I ever see a rake abundance score that's higher than the max score you said there should be? That kind of thing. There is sort of a data integrity verification process that happens on my end. That said, these data we take at face value. They are, as we say, as is. We assume that the surveyors are doing their due diligence. These are highly trained individuals. They're way more competent than I am. I'm going to trust what they have done before I would ever trust what I was trying to do here as being not a subject matter expert. So there could be inaccuracies in here. There could be misidentified taxa. There could be data entry errors. We assume there aren't, but anyone who uses the data should know buyer beware. And there is actually a disclaimer at the bottom of the tab, both the overview tab and the records tab, that notes this. We cannot warranty these data. That said, they are really good data, I think, as a general rule. And perhaps some of the researchers who have used them in their research can speak to that more highly. But as a general rule, I think most of these surveyors would tell you, trust our data. They're pretty high quality. The other thing, the other question that was embedded in there has to do with common names versus scientific names. Hey, we have really good reasons for using scientific names and focusing on them. It's the language of science for a lot of reasons. That's why we default to them. However, by popular demand, I spent a not insignificant amount of time making it so that on the overview tab, you can toggle in common names. That is what this toggle names button does. So you can see there are scientific names over here. Hit that button and they become common names throughout this tab, including in the taxon selector. So if scientific names are not your bag, here's common names. That said, you may refer to a species by a different common name than your friend does. Common names are problematic. So if you may not end up liking the common names any better, but they are here in case they help in some capacity.
Great, thanks, Alex.
Oh, I thought I was sharing my screen that whole time. Do people want me to actually show you what I was doing? Sorry, I always forget that if screen share has been turned off. Here, let me show you that once more.
Sure.
These are the common names. The toggle names button becomes the scientific names. You can toggle them back and forth, including in the selector. And then the disclaimer I was talking about down here are these. As far as we know, the data are really great and high quality and there's no errors, but we can't know, and you should take that for what it's worth.
Thank you, Alex. And I think actually sharing your screen and pointing out the disclaimers perhaps is going to help answer the next question, which was wondering about data on rare species occurrence and if those get masked or protected.
Yes, in fact, statute makes us do that, and I'm happy to do it anyway because I recognize the importance of this. We have a little lookup table of the 12 species that we know of that have protected status. On this tab, if you were to select a lake that had one of these, I'm sure I'm not going to be lucky enough to find one right now. Usually up in the north, they sometimes show up. But if I did click on one of these, what you would see over here is protected species 4, protected species 10, protected species 2. So you'd know there was a protected species found at that lake at some point, but you wouldn't know where and you wouldn't know which one. On the records tab, we go one step further, and the disclaimer on this that tab acknowledges this. If a column would exist for that taxon, instead of just anonymizing it like that, we just delete that column. You can't see it and you can't download it. So the app should be, I hope, fully in compliance with the statute on this front. Though, if it's not, let me know because I want to know that. That's just applies to the 12 taxa that we know of as being with protected status. I think only 4 of which have ever been detected at any PI survey to date. So it's a small percentage of taxa.
Great, thanks, Alex. Okay, next question, more about dealing with tricky data. So noticing that abundance is not always estimated in PI surveys, and the data in the surveys can vary greatly in quality and type. Could you talk about how you manage those disparities? And maybe just my own personal note, Alex, I remember you talking at one point in it about how you would deal with things like typos or misspellings and species names. So maybe some of that ties into the answer to this question.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this briefly on the submissions tab, but the question asker is absolutely right. If there is anything that is really disparate about different surveys done by different surveyors, it is how abundance is cataloged. If it is, some people just use presence absence. Some people use what I call rake score. So a numerical value ranging between 0 and 1 or 0 and 3 or 0 and 5. Sometimes that has to do with like what percentage of the rake head is covered by a specific taxon. Sometimes it's a little more knee-jerk than that. Like this looks like a 3, I've heard. Sometimes the surveyors will add in some additional information like, oh, I saw this visually, but it wasn't on my rake head. That might be sometimes represented in a rake score. Sometimes it's represented by text. That's all part of the QA/QC process to try to delineate that. Some people actually gather wet weights instead of abundance at all, which I guess is still kind of a measure of abundance. The app can acknowledge that and store those data too. That's one of the options for that max rake score question. If you don't know what the max rake score was, like, all right, I'm seeing 1s and 2s in here for taxa, but I don't know. Maybe a 5 could have been possible and we just didn't see that. There's an unknown option. Mike, in fact, had to use that unknown option a lot. When he didn't know what the max score was, he just sort of degraded those data down to presence and absence. And if you go to the records tab and pull up a lot of the records from a while ago, that's mostly what you'll see is true, false. This was seen, this was not seen, and any of those visual things aren't even included when that happens. So, and you know, we're not going to wade into the debate of like what does a 2 mean when the max score is a 4 versus what a 3 means when the max score is a 5. Like, there is information contained in those data. As a data scientist, I would say they're ordinal. The order means something, but the distances between the levels are sketchy or squishy. There are ways to handle ordinal data that is respectful of that fact while still wringing as much meaningful information out of them as you can. I would say to any user of these data, recognize that they are ordinal and that different surveyors may have a different meaning for what 2 means than others do. And some may not even use those scores at all, as the the commenter pointed out. Buyer beware on the data, but like I would say, the general consensus is that these data are good, high quality, and they're the only show in town. If you want to know something about plant community ecology data in the state, what you got. And it's so compared to nothing, it's really good, right? Every election's a choice. It's not this or nothing, it's this or something else. Well, in this case, it really is this or nothing in some senses. And then yeah, Megan, you brought up like how do I handle discrepancies? I think the like flowchart checklist thing I have for QA/QC has 21 steps of things that I have it chew on in the data set to see if there's inconsistencies, and it gets longer by the day. So I try to do as much QA/QC as I can. That said, I don't always know what was intended, and sometimes the submitter doesn't either.
Thank you. Okay. Here we go. Okay, on to the next question. Have you considered providing a downloadable template for entering tabular data, with a note that it might help some folks who maybe haven't done this type of survey before?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The long answer is that actually what you want? So keeping in mind that when we glue all these data together into our database, a lot of taxa are only seen a couple of times. Some some columns only show up a couple of times. I think at present count our database has 250 some columns. Many of those you will never see on any survey you do, or may not be relevant to you in any survey that you do. So it's hard for us to be like, yeah, you're definitely going to see these taxa and you're definitely not going to see these other taxa, right? So what a template would look like is like kind of a question to me, because like when I think template, the biggest thing I think of is standardized column names. That's the number one. Like if we could get all the data into columns that had the same names, it would be really much easier to join these data together. But that's going to mean an awful lot of columns that most of the time are going to be empty for you. That's not to say we can do it. And I'm super excited about the prospect of doing it. I'm just confused how to do it well for the practitioners who would want it, if that makes sense. That said, I think that this overview tab is a great place to start. If you're going to be surveying Forest Lake next week, it might not be a bad idea to go in here and say, okay, 23 taxa have been seen before. I'm going to at least put these column headings into my survey file before I even send them out in the field or whatever. Or maybe you look at neighboring lakes and see what else is in the area, and you can populate columns in that way. That said, if anyone wants a template file, I'll make you a template file as long as you give me some parameters for what would be useful for you.
All right. Great. Next question. Sorry, the top question switched on me, so I'm changing my train of thought here. The top question now is: are you recommending that we get DNR data from you now instead of from DNR?
Get data from where it makes sense to get data from for you. I am agnostic to that. We just want the data out there, accessible. I mean, for me, I think we have this challenge of like integrating all these different data together, including data from the DNR. So like the choices we make in organizing and structuring these data are specific to that goal. I have to make these data and those data and these data and those data all talk nicely to each other. And there are differences between DNR and non-DNR data. There's differences between different DNR data sets. If that's not something you want to wade into, go to DNR for data. I would hazard to say this is a pretty safe statement, but MASERC is not looking to be any sort of replacement for other sources of data. We're just trying to be an additional source, especially if we can add some value to it in the process.
Thanks, Alex. And maybe I might ask a quick follow-up question to that. Maybe I'm reading between the lines and some of the questions that I've seen come through Q&A. But could you talk about maybe DNR is one of the biggest, I think, people who contribute data to this, but they're not the only one. So could you talk a little bit about where all the data is coming from and how that helps play into this too?
Yeah, largest single chunk is from the various DNR programs listed here on the leaderboard tab. These are in large part from Mike's tenure of assembling those data that I talked about earlier. But we've got a lot of data from other sources. We have academic data. So the Newman Lab here at the U has been doing surveys for a long time, as I noted. We have consultant groups like Blue Water Science, Bar Engineering, Freshwater Scientific Services. I hope some of those are in the audience. We have local partners like Capital Region Watershed District, Three Rivers Park District, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is a great partner. Counties are sending us data. We have lake associations and soil and water conservation districts also that have been sending us data. Basically, anyone who has it is able to send it to us if they want.
Great, thank you. Okay. Next question is wondering if the app notes invasive species found and if when that's highlighted, they get entered over into EdMaps.
I don't do that. I do have the app automatically indicating when an invasive species has been detected. Here, for example, curly leaf pondweed was detected here. Oh, there's one of your protected species. Look at that. I did get one after all. Um, I don't then take that and move it anywhere else. I guess I'm assuming that the PI surveyor has done this already if they noted that the species existed. Not to say it couldn't be done, but I'm not doing that presently. It's probably an easy check I could add to the QA/QC is, hey, there's an invasive. Go check. Is this listed somewhere else? And if not, I could put it through. I'm not sure if I'm willing to commit to doing that just yet, but I think it's a good idea. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, great. Thank you. All right. Next question. This is a fantastic tool, they say. Is there documentation for how this app was developed? And is it hosted on your own Shiny server or shinyapps.io? And can you talk about the biggest challenge in developing the app? We must have another Shiny app user in the audience here.
Must be. Let me actually do this really quick. Here we go. If someone out there is a coder and can make use of this, the entire code for PI Charter with patch notes and version histories and issue logs and all sorts of stuff is available on my GitHub page. Bajcz A475/PI surveys. I just put the link in the chat. If you want to fork this and use it, if you want to check it out, if you want to comment on it, do pull requests, whatever you want to do, go for it. That's where it is. What was the rest of the question?
What server it's hosted on and
Yes,
your
okay.
biggest challenge?
shinyapps.io is where we're hosting it. We would love to host it internally here at the U. There is not internal hosting support capacity at this time. We are advocating for there to be some at some point. That's why the app does not at present have, when you go to it, a umn.edu slug. It says University of Minnesota, but then it says shinyapps.io. That's why. As for the biggest development challenge, it's the submissions tab. If you tally up the code, which you can do if you go here, that tab alone is probably 85% of the code for this entire app. Maybe not surprisingly. That's why I wanted to go through it and like highlight the sojourn it was to take all these different kinds of files and then even files I haven't even seen before or seen yet and say, let me try to anticipate all the ways these files are going to be different and then have the app smoosh and funnel them into one homogenized structure at the end. It took a while. That's why version 1 was kind of boring. It was largely to get that submissions tab up and running. And it's not to say I didn't focus on the submissions tab this time around. I did. I overhauled it completely so that it'd be easier and prettier. But nevertheless, it was a big chore the first time around just to get that running. It may be private, but it shouldn't be private. So offline, Katya, if you're interested, I can either add you as a collaborator or make that one public. I do not mind at all. I think because I have a university affiliated account, it defaults everything to private. And I just hadn't had anyone ask before. So I hadn't made it public yet, but I'm happy to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex. I am going to take over the screen sharing again because it's already almost 1 o'clock. We have 1 minute to go. And every time we host these, we schedule an hour and we leave half of it for questions. And it's just wonderful to see all of the engagement because we have many more questions, then we have time to answer. So if we didn't get to yours, I'm sorry. But I did put Alex's email up on the screen. So I'm sure Alex would be happy to answer questions by email too if there's anything that you didn't get to see the answer to that you were hoping to. Thank you all for coming. I know we've now officially hit 2 o'clock, at least here on Central Time. We really appreciate you joining us. We do have our next webinar scheduled for March. So if you're interested in learning more about how submerged water jets might help reduce floating aquatic plants near boat launches and hopefully help prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species by that pathway, join us in March. I don't have my chat, so maybe I'll ask Michelle if she can drop the link quick into chat for you to register for that. Watch your inboxes for a notice when this recording is ready. Like I mentioned, it takes about a week to get it transcribed and turned around and up onto YouTube, but we'll have the recording live there for you. And also you can watch your inboxes, or I think maybe a pop-up will come up for a survey to tell us about your experience with the webinar today. And we always appreciate your feedback with that. So with that, I think we will sign off. Thank you again, Alex, for joining us and sharing all of this great information about PI Charter. We really appreciate you taking your time to be part of the webinar series.